Good afternoon. I'll call the meeting of the 911 Advisory Board to order. First order of business is roll call. Chief Scott Howland.
Present.
Brenda Bruner.
Present.
Leanne Magoski.
Present.
And Ann Harb.
Present.
Sheriff Inc. Chief Edward Hatfield. Chris Herron.
Present.
Chief Elise Warren.
Present.
Chief Craig Carter.
Present.
We have a quorum. First order of business is approval of the minutes from May 2019. Are there any corrections? Hearing no corrections, do we have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve minutes?
Second.
Motion to by Chief Howland, second by
Leanne Magoski.
Leanne. Okay. We have Sheriff Corey Honey has now arrived.
Here.
Okay.
Okay, approval of the minutes. We have a motion and a second. A roll call vote. Chief Howland.
Yes.
There's no mic.
Brenda Bruner.
Yes.
Is that an aye?
Aye.
Leanne Magoski.
Aye.
And Ann Harb.
Aye.
Sheriff Honey.
This is the approval of minutes? Sorry.
Yes.
Yes, aye.
So we stand adjourned for the moment. Okay, let the record reflect we went back into session at 1:35. Also, let the record reflect that Sheriff Ingrid Braun arrived at 1:10 into closed session. Next item, regarding the closed sessions, we did not take any actions and have nothing to report. Next item up is a legislative update from Mr. Salvador, who's the Chief of Calabasas Legislative and External Affairs. So, Reggie?
Good afternoon, everybody. Just want to provide an update on some state and federal bills that have been being tracked. Just in July, the governor signed SB 96, which updated the fee structure for the Setna Fund to fund the 911 system, or I should say the build out of next generation 911 and other relative upgrades. AB 569, which is by Assemblymember Fong, would make it a crime to falsely report an active shooter to law enforcement or other specified entities, and that the reporter would be liable for the costs of the emergency response. That bill actually is being held at the desk after being first initially passed and then withdrawn. So that is currently being held. And also, AB 596, which is by Assemblymember Deep, that would allow the use of automatic dialing announcing devices in specified circumstances, including issuing emergency alerts and testing enhanced 911. That is currently in the Assembly for concurrence in Senate amendments. AB 1079, which is from Assemblymember Santiago, would expand the use of unlisted numbers to include testing systems that respond to 911 calls or alert and warning systems. That actually is the bill that is currently being held at the desk. So just to clarify, the Assemblymember Fong bill, that is currently in Assembly Public Safety. It was initially refused passage, so it's currently still being held there at the Assembly Public Safety. AB 1168, which is by Assemblymember Mullen, would require each public safety answering point to deploy text to 911. That is also in the Assembly awaiting concurrence in Senate amendments. AB 911, which is by Assemblymember Rodriguez, would require Cal OES to implement and operate a system that would allow first responders to receive health and safety information from at-risk persons during a 911 call. That is also currently in Senate appropriations and being placed on suspense. Also, AB 1366 by Assemblymember Gonzalez is the bill that would extend the sunset date of VoIP deregulation to January of 2025. That is currently held, that's also currently in Senate appropriations. AB 1699 by Assemblymember Levine would prohibit mobile internet service providers from impairing or degrading internet service of first responder agencies during an emergency. That is currently on the Senate floor in order to third reading. Also, SB 208, which is the Consumer Call Protection Act by Senator Hueso, requires telecommunications service providers to implement certain protocols and verify and authenticate caller identification by January of 2021. That is currently on the Assembly floor for their third reading. Lastly, on the state side, SB 670 by Assemblymember McGuire would require Cal OES to adopt by regulations thresholds for community isolation outages. Telecom service providers would be required to notify Cal OES whenever a community isolation occurs within 60 minutes of discovering the outage, and that is currently in Assembly appropriations. On the federal side, there were two bills that I discussed last time, HR 292, which would streamline broadband permit process by allowing states and tribes certain authorities for permitting within land owned by the National Forest System, Department of Interior, and tribes. That is still at the House Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry, while S273 would require telecommunications service providers to share user device location with law enforcement officers or PSAP representatives to respond to a call for assistance or life-threatening emergency. That also has not moved from the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. The last bill, which I will discuss, was introduced in July by by Congresswoman Ann Eshoo. And what that is the WIRED Act. The WIRED Act is the acronym for the Wireless Infrastructure Resiliency During Emergencies and Disasters Act. Now, what that does would amend the Federal Communications Act to include public safety requirements in the terms and conditions that states may require of wireless service providers. Currently, 15 members of the California congressional delegations have co-signed as co-sponsors for that bill, and that is currently awaiting action for assignment at the House Committee on Energy and Commerce. That is it for now, unless there's any questions.
Any questions for Mrs. Salvador from the board? Any public comment?
Pat, can we get that also sent to us as well so we keep an eye on those?
Certainly.
This will be sent around and posted as well.
Okay, moving on to the next agenda item, number 5, which is the California 911 Emergency Communications Branch report from Mr. Budge Courier.
Right, so you have the slides in front of you, and I apologize, I'm behind a couple of you, but a little bit easier for me to see from this angle. So if you have, at any point, if you have questions, feel free to just interrupt, and I'm glad to provide additional detail on any of the information that I'll be presenting. What you see on this slide, slide 6 here, is an overview of some of the things I'll be talking about. And again, if you have questions outside of this, please feel free to let me know, and I'll be happy to address them. The first slide we're going to go over is our call statistics for 2018. These numbers we keep constantly in front of us because it gives us kind of a scope and size of the network that we're managing in California. Each year, 27 million 911 calls. And each year we track these metrics to see where they're headed, and we've shown on this graphic the comparison from last year, from 2017. And the trends this year are very similar to this. We expect these numbers to come in very close to this come the end of the year. So any questions on the call stats? All right, so each of our public safety answering points throughout the state, we have roughly 438 of them. We have designated team members within the California 911 branch that conduct a fiscal and operational review. We call them PSAP Advisors. They're assigned a group of PSAPs throughout the state. And the goal is to have them to visit over 100 of them each year to make sure that we're constantly on this cycle. So this year, to date, as of July 1st, we had visited 52 different PSAPs. So we're on pace to meet that 100 goal by the end of the year. And each time that I present here, I encourage everyone who's in the audience, everyone who's listening, and obviously the board members, if you would like to schedule a time for a PSAP advisor to come down and sit with you, let me know. We have on a regular cycle those that haven't been visited in a while, but we can certainly adjust to the needs of those that are out there. What we do when we come and sit down with usually it's your communications center manager and maybe a dispatch supervisor and anyone else at the local level you want us to meet with, is we go over our operations manual, what we fund, call answer times, statistics, ECATS reports, which is our automated call answering log that we use, and anything else that you may have operational questions that we, the 911 branch, play a role in. So we can talk through funding models and any of the current projects that we have deployed, all of which I'm going to give an update on today. So this is your opportunity to sit down. Ideally, you would want to sit down with these advisors at least 18 months to 24 months before you're going to try and replace your equipment. And that will help you understand the process that you need to go through to develop a statement of work and all the other things that you have to consider when you start to engage a vendor on your call answering equipment that's at your PSAPs. So any questions on this before we move on? All right, hearing none. The next slide we're going to show is CPE Install. So this is the number of installs of new customer premise equipment that we've done throughout the state. And as of July 1st, we had installed 34 new systems throughout the state, some quite large, some smaller. And so we're on pace to continue that throughout the rest of the year. We're very thankful that we have the funding to support this now, and there's no challenges to the Setna funding model. So everything moving into the new fiscal year, which started on July 1st, all of those scheduled CPE upgrades can happen on schedule. And everything we're working on is going to continue through the pipeline. And you can see we average somewhere between 60 and 90 of these a year. Any questions on that? The goal here is to make sure that we're on a 5-year replacement schedule so that we make sure that we don't have any older CPE out there. We've seen that after years 6 and 7, the reliability of this equipment goes way down, and so it's in the best interest of the state to replace that equipment within 7 years. And so the window is 5 to 7 years. So if you're coming up on that window, you might want to reach out to the 911 branch. All right, the next graphic talks about our text to 911 deployment. So one of the counties displayed on here, the entire name did not display, so thank you, Leanne, for pointing that out. But what we've listed here is the counties that have deployed. You see them on the left-hand column, the number of PSAPs in that county, the number that are deployed, and the number that are in the process of deployment, and then we give you the percentage at the end. Since the last advisory board meeting, which was roughly 3 months ago, we've got 2 more PSAPs that are live and 7 more that have been added to the deployment process. The reason why the pace has slowed down is because the PSAP community knows we're in this transitional period. Our current contract expires in April. The NextGen 911 contract vendor that we will be announcing today will be the new provider of this service. And so we will have to transition all of these active PSAPs off of their existing, whether it's integrated or web-based solution, into this new contract vehicle very quickly. And so if you are fully deployed, you can expect to hear from the vendor we announced today in the very near future to begin that transition process. And so I think that's it on this. Any questions on the text deployment and where we are? Okay, we still have this ongoing issue with transfer, and I briefed this out at the last advisory board. Because we're using 2 different text control centers and because of the way our contract vehicle was structured when it was originally written 5 years ago, we have this challenge where if you are integrated, you can't transfer from one TCC to another TCC, primary to secondary. It has to do with the shape files and the way that they're defined in the system. This will be solved and addressed through the NextGen 911 contract, and so we will put a solution in place that will fix this, but it is an ongoing issue that everyone should be aware of, especially if you have an integrated solution and you're trying to transfer to a web-based solution in your county. The other thing I put on this slide is AB 1168, which Reggie briefed out. It could impact our deployment timeline and put a requirement to have us fully deployed by 2021. And so we're tracking this bill very closely. And obviously, with NextGen 911 moving forward, this is an important thing to consider in the rollout of NextGen 911. So any questions on text? Okay, hearing none. Probably one of the things most of us are here from, looking in the audience anyways, is to get an update on where we are in NextGen 911. So you remember, it was roughly 3 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, we started briefing out NextGen 911. We came up with these puzzle pieces. Matter of fact, Victoria is in the back of the room who actually made this graphic. So you can thank her for the puzzle pieces. So the technology is based on NENA i3 standards. It's been deployed and is a fully developed technology ready to go. And we've been working very hard to discuss with the PSAPs and the vendors and of course this board and everybody else what the impact will be operationally in the PSAP and really to the entire 911 call flow once NextGen 911 goes in place. So collaboration has been an ongoing focus of what we've been doing since the beginning, and that's continuing. And I'm going to talk about our next wave of collaboration that we have coming with the rollout of NextGen 911. Paul pointed out that I should be calling it Now Generation 911 because it's happening now, which is true. And so we're getting to that point. And that's because of the help of everyone in this room in supporting SB 96. So the passing of that legislation provided the sustainable funding, and that combined with the passing of the governor's budget gave us the funding we need to support 911 through the remainder of this current fiscal year, and then once the funding model kicks in January of 2020. So the good news is we have the funding, and I know many of you helped us through that process. The organizations that you support were very active in this process, and some of you in this room were even there testifying in front of the budget subcommittees, and I really thank you for that help and support. We've also circled back with the legislators who supported this process, because obviously they were the ones who had to vote this into to make this a law. And then when the governor signed this on July 1st, that's what provided the funding to keep this whole thing moving forward. So it was a tremendous effort, and I appreciate all of your support and help, and there were many people in this room that contributed to that process. So the next piece, once we got the funding, is the procurement. And we're going to talk to you today in a lot of detail about where we are in this procurement process. So we're ready to announce today those that have been selected for this process to build NextGen 911 in California. So as we move on, I wanted to give you a high-level overview of the RFP process and sort of how we got to where we are. We began this process actually even before what's listed on this slide. Back in July of 2018, we originally released a pre-solicitation that essentially had the full solution in there. We met with vendors. We were ready to go, and you remember, I think it was August 30th of 2018, when the legislation came up short by one vote, and we had to put all this on hold. We circled back around, met with Department of Technology to get the procurement process going again, while we were simultaneously working on the legislation to get the funding. So in February, we released another pre-solicitation that reflected all the feedback we had got the first time, and we released that out. We met with any of the vendors who wanted to respond to this RFP, and again, we began that iterative process. We developed some not-to-exceed pricing, there was some tariff requirements, there's some technical requirements, and we began to engage with the vendors who would potentially submit a bid. So they submitted feedback, and then we updated based on those confidential discussions in March. On April 1st, we released the RFP. And these key action dates, important to note, were established in February, and not one date was changed or missed. Maybe much to the chagrin of some of those who were responding, because I know this was a lot of work, and I appreciate all the effort that everybody put into this. So the proposals were due to us in May, and then we sat down with each of those proposed bidders and talked through their proposal. And then we submitted back to them feedback and said, okay, give us your best and final offer. Meanwhile, we're working with the Public Utilities Commission to get tariffs filed, because the service has to be aligned with tariff filings over in the PUC. So we're coordinating that effort. The tariffs were filed. There was a 20-day window when we, Cal OES, could comment on the tariffs that were being established. So the analogy that I used during the negotiation was, it's like Tesla and Edison. Electricity in beginning days, those of you who aren't geeks, we're trying to work to define how to regulate electricity back in the day. That's literally what we were doing with NextGen 911, as we had to define the service that would then be regulated through the PUC. And that's the process that we worked on. So we responded to those tariffs, and that process is continuing at the PUC now. We then began to work with each of the vendors through confidential negotiations to get a best and final award, and then that's how we arrived today. And really what we focused on was we wanted to choose partners who could demonstrate an ability to apply and deploy and integrate a compliant NENA I3 solution. They had to demonstrate the ability to file with the CPUC and meet the tariff requirements. And they had to comply with the standard terms and conditions of the state contract and the SLAs, the service level agreements that were in the contract, without modification. Essentially, that was the task before us. And so with us in the room is our procurement official. Emily is here. So she's been working with us through this entire process. Hundreds and hundreds of hours have gone into this to bring us to where we are today. And so when we run through the vendors, when we started, there were 8 vendors, which is a publicly available number. We can't tell you who they were, all of them. And we only have 5 positions. And so there will be some vendors who have worked very hard who won't be in this list. And so having been one of them at one time, spending weeks and months on a proposal that did not get selected, we recognize the effort you put into that, and we appreciate that effort. So please pass on to your teams. We know that this was a heavy lift, and we certainly understand that. So those, obviously, that were selected, that heavy lift, you're going to be replaced with joy here in a moment. So any questions on the process before we go to the next step where we reveal who was selected? Any at all? All right, you don't want to wait any longer, right? All right. So there are 2 different groups of vendors. We have a prime vendor or a statewide vendor that's responsible really for defining the interfaces statewide and serving it as that capacity to be able to route a 911 call to any PSAP in the state. And then there's a regional provider who's really doing the bulk of the work of the call routing at a regional level. Because we're so large, we wanted the ability to back ourselves up so we don't have an outage, and we can theoretically get even beyond 5 nines reliability, where in a perfect world, we won't have a single outage. So those are the 2 groups of vendors. There's a statewide prime vendor, and then there's these regional vendors. So the vendor partners, after the results of the negotiation for the prime, we've selected Atos. So congratulations to Atos. They will be the statewide vendor. We've actually fully executed that contract as of this morning at about 11:30. I think it was about 11:35 this morning. That contract is fully executed, signed by the vendor, CDT, and Cal OES. So they are literally under contract today and ready to go. And so we look forward to the partnership and the work that's going to come very quickly. So the next region we're going to discuss is the central region. So this is roughly from just south of Sacramento all the way down to the Grapevine, from Nevada all the way out to the coast. And for that region, we selected NGA 911. So congratulations, NGA 911, on your efforts, and you'll be working really closely with the statewide partner on that. The next region is the southern region. So this is essentially everything south of the Grapevine, with the exception of LA County, essentially is with this region of the state. And I have a map on the next slide that'll show you that. So for that region, we chose CenturyLink. So congratulations, CenturyLink. You'll be deploying the solution in the southern region. In the northern region, so this is roughly the Bay Area and everything Sacramento north in the state. It's a large region, but because of the way CHP dispatches in the Bay Area and touches all those counties, we put all those together. So for that region, we've selected Synergym Technologies. So congratulations, Synergym. You've been selected for the northern region. You remember that I said that one of the requirements was we had to ensure that every bidder was fully compliant. This was a lot of discussions we had here to make sure that we're not essentially choosing someone who got a failing grade. And we were really, really careful throughout the process. Every one of these vendors has a fully compliant solution, and if they couldn't get through that full compliancy, they were not allowed to be selected. So as we move on to the south, to the LA region, we selected NGA 911 for that region. So congratulations, NGA 911. For the LA region. So LA and the central region will be NGA 911. So while I was presenting these, the contracts were sent to those vendors for signature. So that process has already begun. So they will begin to execute those contracts, and then our PIO has developed a press release, and each vendor company that's associated with this, if you want to coordinate with our PIO, we can work through all those details. So questions from the board? All right, if you want to know what that looks like graphically, here's a graph that shows those regions and the vendors that were selected. And on this chart, we've also listed the state project manager for that region. In addition, what we've done is we've handed you out the draft slide we have for the kickoff meeting that we're going to be holding with each of these vendors. And we have extra copies here available for anyone in the office, and it's already linked on our website. So if you go to our website and look, you'll find a link to this slide deck, and you can see at a high level what we want to cover in these kickoff meetings. And included in there is a timeline, Gantt chart at kind of a high level view. So the way that this project is going to proceed, there's going to be a lot of collaboration that has to happen to make sure we're getting some operational feedback into the process. We've scheduled outreach meetings at 11 or 12 different locations throughout the state from September through October. So it's September 17th through roughly October 10th. And the list and location of those outreach meetings is on our website as well. So if you just hit our 911 splash page, we posted those today. So you'll see where those outreach meetings are. The times of those meetings have not been filled in. We'll fill the times in, and we're going to build the agenda for those. At each of those outreach meetings, this will be the state's opportunity to engage with the PSAP community and let you know the solution that's coming. We will invite the vendor partner to that meeting, but this is the state-run meeting. After that outreach and collaboration, that's when you can expect some more detailed interaction with the vendors. We are going to begin project initialization immediately, which was why it was important not to be bogged down in contract negotiations beyond today. And then regional kickoff meetings will be set up. Built into the process is a project development plan that the prime and each of the regions will have to build and integrate with one another. And those timelines happen fairly quickly. Collaboration has to happen within 60 days, and there's markers at 120 days and 180 days so that we can have the project plan in place, agreed upon, vetted by all parties so we can begin executing the project. What that means is we'll probably be in the PSAPs doing surveys October through December would be my target dates, I would think. So you can expect one of these vendors to be reaching out with you in coordination with the state project manager that's listed on this graphic here to coordinate a survey of your PSAP and to see what's required in your back room. All right, so any questions on the contract, next steps, where we are? All right, so I'm going to work through a couple of the other contracts that we have currently active in the state. One of them is the GIS contract. So the main purpose of the GIS contract is to make sure that we have the data set needed to route a 911 call in a NextGen 911 environment. So that's the purpose of the task force. We had a meeting on August 14th. There was another one. County coordinators met on July 18th. And we're getting a lot of participation in these meetings. And we've discussed the completion of the iteration of the pilot project, which the locations are listed up there on the board. And then we're trying to work through this workflow process. So what we're learning is that GIS updates are typically not under the control of a PSAP. Somebody else owns that process. Could be the police chief. It could be the city manager. It could be the mayor. It could be the board of supervisors at the county level, or maybe the sheriff. So we're finding there's a need that if we identify something that needs to be updated in GIS from a 911 routing perspective, and we push that data back down to the local entity, we have to give it to the person or the entity that has the authority to make the change and the ability to make the change. And sometimes you have one or the other, or neither. You have no ability, no authority, or you have authority and no ability, or vice versa. So we've come up with a funding model and an approach to try and solve this problem. We briefed that out to the LRPC today. Once we finish vetting that, we'll publish that updated process. We've finished collecting data from about 78% of the counties. This is a change from your slides. I put it in bold up here. These slides were prepared about 30 days ago, and we wanted to reflect the progress we've made. What this means is for 78% of the counties, we have the data we needed to route 911 calls. For the remaining counties where we don't have this data, we're going to use publicly available data sets to get what we need to route the 911 call. DDTI, the company that's doing this work, will then finish that data set, turn it over to Atos, who I can now say by name, turn it over to Atos, who's working with Geocom as one of their partners, to develop the data set and create everything that's needed to route a 911 call. So that process and transition literally is going to begin starting today. And then we listed some of the data sources, and I said the Tiger data is the data that we're going to use that if the county didn't provide us data. So that way we have a baseline to route 911 calls. So any questions on this? We'll finish this work early 2020, and then we'll begin to transition this over to the NextGen 911 service provider, Atos in this case. All right, the next project is the location accuracy project. So many of you have probably been approached by Rapid Deploy to deploy this solution in your PSAP. We've got it deployed at 44 locations around the state. I think it might be more than that now. I think it's 50. What's the number now, Kurt? 48. All right, so 48 locations around the state in the first wave. And so what that means is in all of these locations, there's a Cradlepoint router sitting in the back room. In that Cradlepoint router is a AT&T FirstNet SIM, and that's the backhaul that's being used to send the data up to the cloud. Rapid Deploy is crunching the numbers and then displaying this mapping interface back in PSAP over an internet connection. It's essentially what the solution looks like. Wave 2 of the project is going to be bringing a Comcast dedicated IP connection into every PSAP and deploying a Cradlepoint router. The difference in Wave 2 is Cal OES is going to be doing the install of the Cradlepoint router. That way we can test and install the SIM card for the carrier that has the best coverage in that PSAP. We ran into some challenges due to coverage issues and PSAPs and having to run external antennas and these kind of things, which you can imagine if I came in your PSAP and said I want to make an infrastructure change, you kind of look at me in a strange way. So we realized that, and we're going to deploy this using Cal OES technicians. We've ordered the equipment, and that install will begin in September, and we've got dedicated teams. And unless we run into physical space constraints or access limitations or something like that, we'll be fully deployed by the end of the year. And that'll be Wave 2. During the LRPC meeting today, we also discussed some gaps in the training that's being delivered, and so we're going to refresh that as we begin this Wave 2 outreach. We've heard some tremendous success stories in terms of what this location data is able to deliver since we've begun the deployments, and some of you may have heard that from your PSAP as well. So any questions on the location accuracy project?
Budge, just a quick question from the standpoint of, as far as the pilot folks or the first wave folks, can you give us a little more detail on what feedback we've gotten? Because you look at location as a critical component of our 911 process. To have enhanced location is very, very significant when seconds count. What kind of feedback have we gotten as far as the value of that? And then second portion of that is, I know we have a small number of folks who've done an integrated solution with their CAD and CPE versus the add-on approach to give folks options. How has acceptance and workflow worked with those two?
So maybe, Hanan, if I can put you on the spot, because I know you were sharing some of your success stories earlier. So if you want to start, and then I'll finish up.
Sure, why not? We've actually found it to be very useful. There's several of the PSAPs in San Diego County that have already deployed as part of phase 1. The dispatchers have been very impressed with the data that they get, and having the ability to see a satellite map, and you can almost pinpoint which parking space the person is in, if it's in a parking lot or such. So it's enabled us to find people out in the backcountry, find people that are calling 911 just to bother us, and to find people that need help that have no idea where they are. We don't have it integrated in our center, but we have it through a Citrix. Basically, we have it up on our CAD workstation, but through Citrix, so it's on the same monitor, and it just runs everything. We get the location for wireline and for wireless, and when we do text, supposedly we're supposed to be able to get better text locations as well. So we've been very impressed. It's much better location than even phase 2, and more often than not, it comes in before we even get the anti-alley.
So some of these are the success stories, and then obviously integration, finding a way to display this in the PSAP through the CAD interface can be a challenge in some cases. So we're looking at ways to overcome those. How can we integrate it into CAD where it makes sense? And is there a way for the state to bring in, if there's real estate available in your monitor display, or a way to integrate into your monitor display, a secondary device over that Comcast circuit, so that we can provide what we call like a thin client, essentially a workstation that we can display that information on. Because those two big barriers, you're not going to use my CAD machine, or you can't integrate it into the solution that's at the PSAP. Really, the goal of the project is to find a way to overcome those limitations. Long-term, steady state, we would like to have this integrated into CPE and just have it be part of the solution. And NextGen 911 is the first step to really get us in that direction. That's where we're headed. Okay. Any other questions on location accuracy? And from a stats point, depending on the carrier, we're seeing 60 to 80% of the wireless calls are coming into the PSAP with this location data. I don't know if that is probably what you're seeing as well.
When I'm working out on the dispatch floor, I'm seeing probably even more than that.
Okay, which is good news, and that's the goal. And so we're trying to work to get it to. We know it won't be 100% because there's devices have limitations and stuff, but that's the goal. Yep.
And another thing, we've been able to locate non-initialized phones, ones with the 911 prefix. We've found several of those that have been calling, and we've gotten good locations on those through Rapid SOS data.
That's a huge time savings.
That was a huge one.
Yeah, absolutely. So with those good news stories, when we talk to you, Wave 2 PSAPs, welcome us with open arms. Let us know what your concerns are so we can get this deployed in your PSAP. And I know Kurt, who's here in the audience somewhere, will appreciate that because he's the project manager coordinating this. So nice work, Kurt. All right, so on to setting the legislation. So the purpose of this part of the presentation is to make sure we comply with the new statute. So SB 96 was passed, it was signed into law on July 1st, and the updated funding model, it provides the sustainable funding that we need. And I've already thanked you for your help. I mean, I can't thank you enough for where we are. And so with the new budget came $50 million that got transferred from general fund into Setna. And that was to really shore up the difference between the revenue we were collecting under the old model versus the time lag to when we start collecting under the new model. The new collection does not start until January 1st, 2020. So these next series of slides are going to go over some accounting data on how we're going to set the fee and what this looks like moving forward. So this is a high-level overview of how the fee is set. It's based on the appropriations that was given to the 911 branch through the governor's budget and then approved by the legislature. Our appropriations number for this current fiscal year is $170,247,000. That covers the existing 911 system and all the NextGen 911 system activities, as well as building out CAPSnet and all the other initiatives that we've briefed to this board. The access line providers, so think in your mind the AT&T, Frontier, T-Mobile, you know, all the smaller local exchange carriers, everybody was supposed to report to us the number of access lines by August 1st, 2019. We had a meeting on August 14th. Now keep in mind the legislation passed on July 1st, so this is a pretty fast timeline. We had a meeting on August 14th. There were some concerns from some of the carriers on providing individual numbers and Public Records Act's requests and public data being out there. So what we'll end up probably getting is aggregate numbers of access lines in large buckets to correspond to the small local exchange carriers, which we've already received, the cable providers, voice over IP, you can think there of that, although they do more than that. The wire line providers, AT&T, Frontier, those two, and then the wireless providers, all the cellular companies. Those are the big buckets that we're going to get. Once we know the number of access lines, we can set the fee, and we have to set the fee and announce it and publish it by October 1st. 30 days prior to October 1st, we have to publicly announce how we're going to do that. That's these next slides. So essentially, what's in the statute is we take our appropriations, that $170+ million, we subtract off of that the balance that we have in our account from the previous fiscal year, and that's the revenue needed. And then we calculate the surcharge. We use this formula here. So those of you who love math class in high school, here it is. For you poli-sci majors, sorry, we have to do some math here. You take the revenue needed and you divide by 12 months times the number of access lines. That's the formula that we're going to use. So we have the appropriations number. We have the balance we carried over from last year. We know those two numbers. Right now we're working on the number of access lines. So this is what it looks like in a spreadsheet. So we take that $170,247,000, we subtract off of it roughly $6 million that we carried over from last year. So the revenue we need to bring in through this surcharge is $164,161,000. So what you see on the right side of this chart is if the number of access lines is 42 million, then we would need to set the fee at 33 cents to collect the revenue needed. If on the upper end of the scale, the number of access lines comes in at 56 million, then we need to set the revenue or the surcharge at 25 cents in order to bring in the revenue. Now, where did the 42 million and the 56 million come from? The 56 million is based on FCC 477 data, which is the number of subscriptions. It's not an exact correlation to access lines, but it's pretty close. So that's a really good upper bound. The 42 million was the result of negotiations and conversations with the carriers a year ago, and the number that they told us was probably the lower end of the scale. When these numbers are reported to us, they're going to come somewhere in between those two. And then each year, we'll set that surcharge, and then we'll move on. So everyone's all good to go, totally understand that. Well, guess what? It's different this year. Because we have a half a year where we're collecting under the old funding model and a half a year where we're collecting under the new funding model. So that's what this graphic is talking about. So I have to take that 170 million again, subtract off my previous year balance on slide 25 here, and you get down to 164 million. And then I have to take off of that the revenue that I'm going to get from the old funding model, which is roughly $30 million, and the 50 million that was transferred into our account. So roughly subtract off 80 million. The remainder is what I need to collect over the next 6 months. And you can see the numbers are roughly the same, right? To get to that 83 million, or to get to that 84 million number I need, on the lower end, I need 33 cents. If I have a low number of access lines, if I have 56 million access lines, I'll set it closer to 25 cents. In the next 2 to 3 weeks, we will finish gathering the data on the access lines. We'll put the letter out. You all will receive a copy of that, and then we have to post that on our website and make it publicly available by October 1st. So that's where we are with CETNA and how this new fee structure is going to work and how the process will roll out moving forward. So any questions on that? The next graphic is our fund condition statement, and I know that it's difficult to read on this screen, but your PowerPoints have the hyperlink in there, and the one that'll be linked on our website will have that as well. So I put this in there because this was just published by the Department of Finance for the fund condition statement for the CETNA fund, and you see at the top of that beginning balance, there's where that $6 million comes in. So keep in mind this is in thousands of dollars, so there's basically 3 zeros missing from every number that's on that screen. And then this graphic also shows you the allocations for what we're allowed to generate expenditures and apply toward those different categories. And so the next time we meet, we'll give you a little bit more granularity on what this fund condition statement is. It was literally just posted as part of the governor's budget it became public on the website in July. So we'll get that a little bit more detail for you the next time we meet, unless somebody has a question today on this.
Okay, is there any questions from the board for Budge?
Actually, I have a comment for Budge, if I may.
Absolutely.
Budge, I just wanted to say, I think as we've just heard the significant update, I'm a little disappointed in our crowd that we didn't get cheers from the standpoint of, I mean, you really think about what was announced today. We've gone from the concept of NextGen 911 that we've been working on for years to we are kicking off reality of building a new 911 system for California that ultimately means increased reliability, better location, and ultimately for the public, when they dial 911, they're going to be able to get help, emergency assistance much quicker because that system is going to work much better than our existing system. So I think we need some cheers in the crowd. Because this has been a long time coming. And then the other thing I just wanted to say is, and thank Budge and Pat and the OES team, along with CDT and all the partners that have gone into all this, because you talk about the funding, what an incredible lift that's been. The fact that legislature, we got the governor on board, and we have the funding in place to build the future. The fact that all the work that is, and planning that has gone into the contracts and everything else to be able to bring vendors on today, significant amount of work, and most of the work that's happened has gone on behind the scenes. And there's not a big spotlight for the folks who've done it. So I think we need to give a quick round of applause for the folks who've been working on this, because they've done a tremendous job. And I just want to say I am excited because we are building a NextGen 911, something that we've needed for a long time in California.
Scott, I would add to that and say that the government is not always known for being efficient, but I can tell you, having seen behind the scenes on how this went down with your staff and how they were able to shoestring one thing going to keep us operational until this the legislation passed and the CETNA funds. to do all that and make it work, amazing. I definitely applaud your group and keeping this thing running. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you both, Chief and Chief. I would like to make one comment, and that is that I've watched over the last year, in addition to the 911 team, one individual work weekends, work nights. I've seen emails coming to him at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. It's ridiculous. The guy never sleeps, and that's Budge. So congratulations, Budge. Job well done. Thank you. Okay, are there any other questions from the board for Budge? Any questions from the audience? We're moving along. LRPC update, Mr. Hare.
Well, it won't be nearly as exciting, but we did have cheers and applause at the LRPC meeting this morning as well for the team, and I'll just echo what a couple of members just said. And as someone who's been involved in in the LRPC or the advisory board for many years, you guys nailed it on the head. What we're seeing from the leadership team right now is really exciting, culminating in where we are today, especially compared to a few years ago where we just didn't have the collaboration. So I'll talk a little bit more about that collaboration. In addition to what you heard Budge talk about, the LRPC, as you'll recall, we've got a couple of task forces, actually several task forces working out there in the PSAP community, and that's really where the team, the 911 branch team, is collecting information, collecting feedback that are help driving all of the decisions that Budge talked about today. So we got reports from our NextGen task forces, each region, LA, South, North, and Central, met recently, and we had members from each of those. I've been talking too much, my microphone. Paul Dumais, is that you? But each of those groups was here today just to provide an update on their discussions. A couple of highlights for you. That's led to a discussion about getting a line level working group. So, while these regional task forces tend to have management, maybe some supervisory level participation, there was discussion about getting line level participation. And so we're push that back to the state to give us some feedback on how to make that happen so that we make sure that as these decisions are being made, there's someone talking about what is the impact at the lowest level, if you will, in the PSAP for those that are answering the calls. The other thing, quite a bit of discussion about some updates to the ops policy in terms of funding. And so a couple of the things that the branch ran by us and we gave some feedback on is adjustments to the funding levels, adding some items back to the residual list that you can use your state 911 funding towards, raising the ATA from $3,000 to $10,000 per PSAP and also for county coordinators, and providing additional training opportunities for PSAPs. Also eliminating or sunsetting the GIS allotment, and there's a new way of funding GIS work in the future. So those things are all things that'll be coming. In addition, we're looking at having some discussions with the 911 branch on the funding model as it pertains to NextGen, and so that will likely be coming in January for the changes next July. And then the last thing is just on that location accuracy project. That's the Rapid SOS, Rapid Deploy. A lot of good feedback from the task forces on that has been shared with the vendor and with the state so that as they continue to roll that project out, there's additional training that's provided to the PSAPs so that they're prepared when they're rolling that system out. With that, we just met this morning. It was a marathon meeting. We went a little over 3 hours. We're looking at having a fall meeting in late September, early October, just because there is so much going on. We want to make sure to meet with the state to provide our feedback, and then we'll have our winter meeting in conjunction with the last advisory board meeting of the year. End of report.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Any questions from the audience? Okay, the next 911 advisory board meeting has been scheduled. I'm sorry, Mitch.
Yeah, I had one alibi question for Budge. So if you can come back to the microphone, and while you're walking, Budge, I'll announce it. So, Budge, we received notification of a grant application that you had filled out to the federal government asking for assistance, and I was hoping you could maybe give a little short update where that sits.
Yeah, so we, some of you have probably heard of the effort at the federal level to provide funding for NextGen 911. They set aside a little over $100 million. We applied for that grant 9 months ago, 10 months ago. It's been a while when they announced the notice of funding opportunity. And we included in our submission some additional activities that we could support in the event that other states were not successful in receiving their grant funding for one reason or another. There was a number of requirements. So originally we were scheduled to receive about $10.1 million, but because of the way funding was allocated, in the end, I think we ended up receiving 11.3, Paul? Is that the number? I think it's somewhere around 11.3 million in the NextGen 911 grant. That money is spread across 3 years. It is administered through the State Administrative Authority, and then we will directly support this NextGen 911 effort with it. One of the things we're looking to really do with this funding is to make sure that the GIS work that we're doing, which could potentially require additional staff, we could potentially fund those through the grant. As you know, it's very difficult to hire new people at the state, but we may be able to support some of this activity through the grant process. And then the rest of it is all just going to go as part of this NextGen 911 effort. With an annual budget of $170 million, obviously this 11 million is not going to dramatically move the needle, but it's absolutely essential to the work we're doing. And really it positions us for the next step. Earlier, Reggie gave a report from the federal legislation. So Congresswoman Ann Eshoo is co-sponsoring a bill that is a larger funding package in the billions of dollars at the federal level. And this would position us in a place to be ready to apply for that grant a year or two from now. So this is really the first step in making sure that we're in alignment with what the feds are saying we need to be doing for NextGen 911, and we are, and that's an indication that we received the grant. So we were working through the process and need to work through grants and send a letter and figure out, how that'll be distributed into the fund and then offset the fee setting, obviously by a few $1 million over the course of 3 years.
Hey, thank you, Budge. I just wanted to say thank you for that effort, and it just wanted to highlight for the board how we're working a lot of activities parallel. We're not waiting sequentially. Goes back to what you were talking about, Scott. We're not waiting to write a contract while we're trying to figure out a funding model, as you mentioned, Chief Carter. And so it's the same situation in this application for the grant, and finding the means to implement this vision required a lot of parallel actions on the assumption that we're going to be successful as we move forward. And so it's not always that way in government, and it's been refreshing and just a really great thing to see, and the support we've had from the governor to every stakeholder at the local level. So thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up, Mitch. That happened over 30 days ago, so it's kind of distant memory. Okay, any other questions or comments from the board? Any questions from the audience? Okay, now the next item up is a public comment. Is there anybody?
I have one for public comment. So with the announcement of these NextGen 911 vendors and partners, we know that integrating to what we do within Cal OES as a whole is important. We are right next to the State Operations Center, so anyone in the audience who's interested in getting a tour of the State Operations Center immediately following adjournment, circle up with me, and we will walk you over there, and we've got that prepared for you. And it's certainly open to everybody in the audience and all the board members as well, those of you who may not have seen the State Operations Center.
Okay, anything else from public comment? Okay, I would like to congratulate Atos, CenturyLink, Synergem, and NGA 911, as well as the 911 branch for 2 or 3 years worth of hard work. So is there a motion to adjourn? We have a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
Without objection, we are adjourned.